The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty Afghan village as Captain Jake Morrison adjusted his radio headset. His unit had been tracking a high-value target for 3 days, and intelligence suggested the terrorist leader was hiding somewhere in this remote settlement nestled between jagged mountains. The village seemed peaceful enough, with children playing in the narrow streets and women hanging laundry on rooftops, but Jake knew appearances could be deceiving in this war-torn region. "Alpha Team, this is Morrison. We have eyes on the target building. Looks like a 2-story mud brick structure, northeast corner of the village," Jake whispered into his comm device. His team of 12 soldiers had positioned themselves strategically around the perimeter, each man trained and ready for whatever might come next. Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez crouched behind a low stone wall, his rifle scope trained on the building's entrance. He'd been in the army for 8 years, served 2 tours in Iraq, and thought he'd seen everything. But something about this mission felt different. The intelligence they'd received was almost too good, too precise. It made him nervous. "Sir, we've got movement on the 2nd floor," Rodriguez reported quietly. "Looks like someone's trying to signal from the window." Jake focused his binoculars on the building. Sure enough, a figure was moving frantically behind what appeared to be bars on the upper window. The person seemed to be waving something white, possibly a piece of cloth. From this distance, it was impossible to make out any details, but the desperate nature of the movement suggested someone in distress. "Could be a hostage situation," Jake murmured to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Sarah Chen. "Intel didn't mention any civilians being held, but that doesn't mean much out here." The mission had been planned as a straightforward raid. Get in, capture or eliminate the target, and extract. But the possibility of innocent civilians complicated everything. Jake had lost sleep over similar situations before, where split-second decisions meant the difference between saving lives and creating an international incident. Private Marcus Williams, the youngest member of their unit at just 19, lay prone behind a cluster of rocks about 50 meters from the target building. This was only his second deployment, and his hands trembled slightly as he gripped his weapon. He could see the figure in the window more clearly now, and it appeared to be a woman with long dark hair, wearing what looked like traditional Afghan clothing. "Alpha Team, we need to reassess," Jake spoke into his radio. "Possible civilian hostage on the 2nd floor. This changes our approach." The rules of engagement were clear, but they didn't always account for the complex realities on the ground. Jake had to make a decision that would affect not only his mission's success but, potentially the lives of everyone involved. He thought about his wife and 2 young daughters back home in Colorado, how he'd promised them he'd come back safely. But he'd also sworn an oath to protect innocent people, wherever they might be. "Rodriguez, Chen, take positions near the rear entrance. Williams, Patterson, you're with me on the front approach. If there's a hostage situation, we need to be ready for anything." As the soldiers moved into position, none of them noticed the subtle hand signals the figure in the window was making. The movements that appeared desperate and random to the untrained eye were actually precise military communications, each gesture carrying specific meaning that would have been immediately recognizable to anyone with special operations training. The woman in the window was Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez, though the soldiers below had no way of knowing that. For the past 6 months, she had been operating under deep cover as part of a classified Navy SEAL mission to infiltrate the very terrorist network that Jake's unit was now hunting. Her cover story was that of a displaced widow from Kabul, seeking shelter with distant relatives in this remote village. Elena had spent years perfecting her Pashto and Dari language skills, studying Afghan culture and customs until she could blend in seamlessly with the local population. Her olive skin and dark features, inherited from her Mexican-American mother, made her physical disguise more believable than it might have been for other operators. But the real key to her success was her ability to think and act like the character she was portraying, becoming so immersed in the role that even she sometimes forgot where Elena ended and her cover identity began. The terrorist leader that Jake's unit was hunting, a man known as Commander Rashid, had indeed been using this building as a safe house. But, he'd left 3 days ago, just hours before Elena had managed to get word to her handlers. The timing had been frustratingly close, but such near misses were common in this type of operation. What concerned Elena now was that an army unit was about to storm a building where she was the only person of interest remaining. Elena had been monitoring radio frequencies and had picked up enough chatter to understand that an American unit was preparing to raid her location. She couldn't risk blowing her cover by using official communication channels, especially since her operation was so highly classified that even most military units weren't aware of SEAL operations in this region. But, she also couldn't let American soldiers walk into what they believed was a hostile situation without some warning. The hand signals she was making from the window were a desperate attempt to communicate her status to any operators who might recognize the code. But, from the way the soldiers below were moving, it was clear they had no idea what she was trying to tell them. They were treating this as a standard hostage rescue scenario, which meant they were about to put themselves and her mission in serious danger. Jake checked his watch. They'd been in position for 20 minutes, and every additional moment increased the risk of being detected by any remaining terrorists in the area. He'd called for backup, but the nearest support was still 40 minutes away. The decision to wait or proceed had to be made now. "All units, we're moving in 3 minutes, Jake announced quietly. "Remember, possible civilian hostage on the second floor. Non-lethal force unless absolutely necessary. Chen, you're taking point on the back stairs. Rodriguez, cover the front entrance. Williams, you're staying here to provide overwatch." Elena heard boots crunching on gravel outside and knew her time was running out. She had to make a choice that could compromise months of careful work. Her mission had already yielded valuable intelligence about terrorist financing networks and planned attacks, but there was still more to learn. However, letting American soldiers get hurt or killed was not an option. She moved away from the window and quickly gathered the few personal items that were part of her cover identity. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard was a waterproof pouch containing her real identification, emergency communication device, and a backup weapon. Elena had hoped she'd never need to use any of these items, but circumstances had forced her hand. The sound of the soldiers' approach was getting closer. Elena could hear them communicating in hushed voices just outside the building. She recognized the tactical language and procedures from her own training. These were good soldiers, professional and careful, but they were about to walk into a situation they didn't understand. Jake was the first through the front door, his weapon raised and ready. The ground floor of the building was sparsely furnished with traditional Afghan carpets, cushions, and low wooden tables. Cooking utensils and personal belongings were scattered around, suggesting the space had been lived in recently. But it was eerily quiet, with no signs of the terrorist leader they'd been tracking. Clear on the ground floor, Jake reported as Chen's team moved up the back staircase. "Rodriguez, secure the perimeter. Something doesn't feel right about this." Elena heard the soldiers' voices getting closer as they climbed the wooden steps to the second floor. She took a deep breath and made her decision. Standing in the center of the small room where she'd been held up, she raised her hands above her head in the universal gesture of surrender. But, she also began speaking in clear, unaccented English. "American soldiers, I am Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez, United States Navy SEAL, identification number 447921 Alpha. I repeat, I am an American military officer operating under classified orders." The soldiers on the staircase stopped moving. Chen, who was in the lead, held up a closed fist to signal the others to hold position. This was definitely not what any of them had expected to hear. The voice was clearly female, speaking perfect English with what sounded like an American accent. But, the claim about being a Navy SEAL was almost impossible to believe. "Say again." Chen called up the stairs, her weapon still trained on the doorway above. "I am Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez, U.S. Navy SEAL. I am currently operating under deep cover as part of a classified mission. I need to speak with your commanding officer immediately." Jake moved to the bottom of the staircase, his mind racing. Female Navy SEALs were extremely rare, and the idea that one would be operating alone in this remote area seemed almost impossible. But the tactical knowledge required to identify their approach and the specific format of the military identification suggested this wasn't some elaborate trap. "If you're American military, then, you know the drill," Jake called up the stairs. "Come down slowly, hands visible, and we'll sort this out." Elena understood the caution. In her position, she would have reacted the same way. Claims like hers were exactly the kind of thing terrorists might use to confuse or manipulate American forces. She would have to prove her identity and hope that these soldiers had the authority and communication capabilities to verify her story. "I'm coming down now," Elena announced. "I'm unarmed and will comply with all instructions." As Elena's footsteps became audible on the wooden stairs, Jake felt a mixture of anticipation and skepticism. In 8 years of military service, he'd encountered plenty of unusual situations, but nothing quite like this. If this woman really was an American SEAL operating undercover, it would explain the mysterious intelligence they'd received about this location. But it would also mean that his unit had stumbled into something much bigger and more complicated than a simple terrorist hunt. The first thing Jake noticed when Elena came into view was how completely she had transformed herself to blend in with the local population. Her clothing, posture, and even the way she moved seemed authentically Afghan. But her eyes held an alertness and tactical awareness that immediately marked her as military trained. When she spoke again, there was an authority in her voice that came from years of command experience. "Captain, I need you to contact your intelligence officer and request verification of Operation Silent Guardian. That's the code name for my mission here. But, I'm warning you, this goes all the way up the chain of command, and there are people who won't be happy that my cover has been blown." Captain Jake Morrison stared at the woman standing before him, trying to process what he was hearing. Elena Vasquez looked nothing like what he'd expected from a Navy SEAL. She stood about 5 feet 6 inches tall, with dark hair that had been styled in the traditional Afghan manner and clothing that showed months of authentic wear. But there was something in her posture and the way her eyes constantly scanned their surroundings that spoke of extensive military training. "Operation Silent Guardian," Jake repeated slowly into his radio. "Control, this is Alpha Team Leader. I need immediate verification of a classified operation by that name. We have a situation that requires high-level clearance." While they waited for a response, Elena remained perfectly still with her hands visible, but Jake noticed she had positioned herself in a way that gave her clear sight lines to all entrances and exits. It was a subtle thing, the kind of tactical awareness that became second nature after years of special operations training. Lieutenant Chen kept her weapon lowered but ready while studying Elena intently. As one of the few women in their unit, Chen was particularly curious about the claim of being a female SEAL. She knew the Navy had only recently begun allowing women into the most elite Special Forces units, and the idea that one was operating alone in Afghanistan seemed almost impossible to believe. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking," Chen said carefully, "how long have you been operating in this area?" Elena looked directly at her, and Chen immediately recognized something familiar in her eyes. It was the same look she'd seen in the mirror after particularly difficult missions, the 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing too much and carrying secrets that couldn't be shared with anyone. 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, Elena replied without hesitation. "I've been tracking the financial networks that fund terrorist operations in this region. The man you're looking for, Commander Rashid, was here until 3 days ago. He left when his contacts warned him about increased American activity in the area." Jake's radio crackled to life. "Alpha Leader, this is Control. We're going to need more than just an operation name for verification. Can your contact provide additional identification?" Elena sighed softly. She'd hoped to avoid revealing too many details, but the situation was beyond her control now. "Tell them Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, SEAL Team 7, reporting to Admiral Sarah Mitchell at JSOC." My handler's code name is Lighthouse, and my current operation has the secondary designation Sandstorm 3. The level of specific detail was impressive, but Jake remained cautious. In his experience, the more elaborate a story sounded, the more likely it was to be fabricated. But Elena's calm demeanor and the casual way she rattled off classified information suggested she was either telling the truth or was one of the most skilled intelligence operatives he'd ever encountered. Control, did you copy all that? We need verification from JSOC level. Roger, Alpha Leader. Stand by for extended verification. This is going to take some time. While they waited, Elena looked around at the room where she'd been living for the past several weeks. It was sparse but functional, with the basic necessities arranged in a way that would appear normal to any casual observer. Hidden throughout the space were various pieces of specialized equipment that had allowed her to maintain contact with her handlers and document the intelligence she'd gathered. Captain, Elena said quietly, I know this is unusual, but I need you to understand something. My presence here isn't just about one mission. The network I've been infiltrating has connections that reach from Afghanistan all the way to terrorist cells in Europe and North America. If my cover is blown completely, it could compromise ongoing operations on 3 continents. Private Williams, who had been standing guard by the window, turned around with a confused expression. Ma'am, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but how does someone like you end up doing this kind of work? I mean, living alone in a place like this for months. Elena smiled slightly, the first time her expression had softened since the soldiers arrived. Someone like me? You mean a woman? Williams blushed and stammered, No, ma'am, I just meant, well, yes, I guess I did mean that. It just seems so dangerous. Private Williams, Elena said, her voice taking on the tone of an instructor, what do you think is more suspicious in a traditional Afghan village, a woman living quietly with relatives while grieving her dead husband, or a man with military bearing trying to blend in with the local population? The young soldier considered this for a moment before nodding in understanding. Elena's cover identity made perfect sense when viewed from that perspective. In Afghan culture, a widow would be expected to keep a low profile and avoid drawing attention to herself. It was actually the perfect disguise for a long-term intelligence operation. Sergeant Rodriguez had been quietly observing the conversation while monitoring their radio frequencies. As someone with extensive combat experience, he was trained to spot deception and inconsistency. But everything about Elena's story seemed to check out, from her detailed knowledge of military procedures to her obvious familiarity with the local area and culture. Ma'am, if you've been here for 6 months, you must have seen a lot of terrorist activity. Why didn't anyone coordinate with units like ours before sending us in? Rodriguez asked. Elena's expression grew more serious. Because my mission is compartmentalized at the highest levels. Even most JSOC operations don't know about what I'm doing here. The intelligence that led your unit to this location came indirectly from information I gathered, but it was filtered through so many channels that nobody made the connection. The radio crackled again. Alpha Leader, this is Control. We've got preliminary confirmation from JSOC. There is indeed an Operation Silent Guardian, and Lieutenant Commander Vasquez is listed as operational. But we're still waiting for final verification from Admiral Mitchell's office. Continue to hold your position. Jake felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. If Elena really was who she claimed to be, then his unit had stumbled into something much bigger than their original mission. But it also meant they were now responsible for protecting an extremely valuable intelligence asset in a hostile environment. Lieutenant Commander, Jake said formally, assuming your identity checks out, what happens now? Are we compromising your mission by being here? Elena looked out the window at the village below. She could see curious faces peering from doorways and windows, wondering what the American soldiers were doing in their neighborhood. The longer this conversation continued, the more difficult it would be to maintain any semblance of her cover story. My cover was already compromised the moment your unit surrounded this building, Elena replied honestly. The local population isn't stupid. They can see that you're treating this as more than just a routine search. By tomorrow, everyone in the village will know that the American military had special interest in the widow who was staying here. Chen realized the implications immediately. So you're saying we've essentially blown a 6-month operation? Not necessarily, Elena said thoughtfully. But, it's going to require some creative storytelling and, possibly a complete change in my operational approach. The good news is that I've already gathered most of the intelligence I came here for. The network I've been tracking has been mapping their financial routes and communication methods for months. Jake was beginning to understand the scope of what Elena had been doing. This wasn't just about catching one terrorist leader, it was about dismantling an entire support system that enabled multiple terrorist organizations across several countries. The intelligence value of such an operation would be enormous. What kind of intelligence are we talking about? Jake asked. Elena glanced around at his soldiers before answering. Bank account numbers, routing information for money transfers, safe house locations, communication protocols, and, most importantly, the identities of financiers and facilitators who've been operating under the radar for years. The kind of information that could shut down terrorist funding for entire regions. The radio interrupted their conversation again. Alpha Leader, this is Control. We have full verification from Admiral Mitchell's office. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez is confirmed as operational under the highest classification levels. You are directed to provide all necessary support and await further instructions. Jake looked at Elena with new respect. The confirmation from such a high level meant that her mission was considered extremely important by the Pentagon. Lieutenant Commander, what do you need from us? Elena was already thinking several steps ahead. Her mind raced through various scenarios and contingency plans she'd developed over the past months. First, we need to create a plausible explanation for why American soldiers raided this building. Something that doesn't directly implicate me but gives the local population a reason for your presence here. What do you suggest? Chen asked. There's a cache of weapons hidden in the basement of this building, left behind by Commander Rashid's group. We can say that you received intelligence about the weapons cache and came to investigate. I'll play the role of a frightened civilian who was hiding upstairs when you arrived. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. That's actually a good cover story. It explains our presence and gives us a legitimate reason to have searched the building thoroughly. Elena continued, Second, I'm going to need extraction from this area within the next 48 hours. My cover identity is compromised, but there are still valuable contacts I can maintain if I relocate to a different region. The network I've been tracking extends far beyond this village. Jake was impressed by how quickly Elena had adapted to the changed circumstances. Instead of treating the blown cover as a mission failure, she was already working on ways to salvage the operation and continue gathering intelligence. Where would you want to relocate? Jake asked. There's a larger town about 60 kilometers south of here where some of the financial facilitators operate. If I can establish a new cover identity there, I might be able to get even closer to the top levels of the network. But, it's going to require careful coordination with my handlers. Private Williams, who had been listening intently to the conversation, raised his hand tentatively. Ma'am, can I ask what it's like living undercover for so long? I mean, pretending to be someone else for months. Elena looked at the young soldier thoughtfully. It was clear he was genuinely curious about the psychological challenges of deep cover work, not just asking out of idle interest. It's one of the most difficult aspects of special operations that they don't really prepare you for in training, Elena admitted. You have to become so immersed in your cover identity that it feels natural, but you also have to maintain enough of your real self to remember who you are and why you're there. Sometimes I catch myself thinking in Pashto or reacting to situations the way my cover identity would instead of how I would as an American officer. Chen found herself deeply interested in Elena's perspective. As a woman in the military, she understood some of the unique challenges Elena faced, but the idea of operating completely alone for months was something Chen couldn't fully imagine. How do you handle the isolation? Chen asked. Being cut off from any support network for so long. Elena was quiet for a moment before answering. You learn to compartmentalize your emotions and focus entirely on the mission. But, I won't lie, there are days when I question whether it's all worth it. When you're sitting in a room like this, listening to people plan attacks against American targets, and you can't do anything immediate to stop them because it would blow your cover, those are the hardest moments. Jake realized that Elena had been carrying an enormous burden for months, gathering intelligence that could save countless lives while being unable to share the emotional weight of what she was learning with anyone. The psychological toll of such work was something that most soldiers never had to face. Ma'am, Rodriguez said respectfully, for what it's worth, what you've been doing here is probably going to save a lot of American lives. That has to count for something. Elena nodded gratefully. That's what keeps me going, Sergeant. Every piece of information I gather, every connection I map out, potentially prevents future attacks. But, it's good to be reminded of that by fellow soldiers who understand the sacrifice involved. The radio crackled once more. Alpha Leader, this is Control. Admiral Mitchell's office is requesting immediate secure communication with Lieutenant Commander Vasquez. Can you establish a protected link? Jake looked at Elena questioningly. Do you have the necessary equipment? Elena moved to a corner of the room and, carefully moved aside what appeared to be a traditional Afghan storage chest. Underneath was a hidden compartment containing sophisticated communication equipment that looked far more advanced than anything Jake's unit carried. I'll need about 10 minutes to establish the connection, Elena said as she began setting up the equipment. This is probably going to involve new orders and a complete change in operational parameters. As Elena worked with the communication equipment, Jake found himself reflecting on how much his understanding of the situation had changed in the past hour. What had started as a routine raid to capture a terrorist leader had turned into something much more complex and significant. They had discovered an American operative who had been conducting one of the most dangerous and important intelligence missions he'd ever heard of. Captain, Elena said as she finished setting up the secure communication link, once I talk to Admiral Mitchell, everything changes. Your unit is probably going to be reassigned to support my extraction and redeployment. Are your soldiers prepared for that kind of mission shift? Jake looked around at his team. They were all professional soldiers who had handled unexpected developments before, but this was definitely beyond anything they'd trained for. We'll adapt, Lieutenant Commander. That's what soldiers do. The secure communication equipment hummed quietly as Elena established the encrypted connection to Admiral Mitchell's office. Jake watched in fascination as she navigated through multiple security protocols with practiced ease. The technology was clearly far more sophisticated than anything his army unit had access to, reinforcing just how high-level Elena's operation really was. Lighthouse, this is Sandstorm 3, Elena spoke into the secure headset. I have a compromised situation requiring immediate guidance. Jake could hear only Elena's side of the conversation, but her facial expressions and body language told a story of increasing complexity. She nodded several times, asked detailed questions about extraction options, and took notes on a waterproof pad that appeared to be designed specifically for field operations. Understood, Admiral. Confirm new operational parameters are Romeo 7 Delta 9. Extraction timeline is 36 hours maximum. Yes, ma'am, the Army unit is fully briefed and ready to provide support. When Elena finished the communication and began shutting down the equipment, her expression was a mixture of determination and concern. Jake could tell that whatever orders she'd received were going to make their situation significantly more complicated. Lieutenant Commander, what's the word from command? Jake asked. Elena packed the communication equipment carefully back into its hidden compartment before answering. The situation has escalated beyond what any of us expected. The intelligence I've gathered over the past 6 months has identified a major terrorist financing summit happening tomorrow night, approximately 40 kilometers from here. 3 of the most wanted terrorist financiers in the region are going to be in the same location at the same time. Chen immediately understood the implications. That's the kind of opportunity that intelligence services dream about. But, I'm guessing it's not going to be a simple matter of calling in an airstrike. Exactly right, Lieutenant, Elena continued. The meeting is taking place in a compound that's attached to a refugee camp housing more than 200 innocent civilians. Any kind of large-scale military operation would result in massive civilian casualties and create an international incident. Rodriguez whistled quietly. So what's the play? Elena looked around at each of the soldiers before answering. Admiral Mitchell is authorizing a joint operation between my deep cover assets and your unit. We're going to infiltrate the compound during the meeting, gather additional intelligence, and attempt to capture the 3 financiers alive. Jake felt his stomach drop. The kind of mission Elena was describing was far beyond what his unit had trained for. They were infantry soldiers, not special operations forces. Lieutenant Commander, with all due respect, my men aren't equipped for that kind of precision operation. We're talking about infiltrating a heavily guarded compound in hostile territory to capture high-value targets without alerting the surrounding refugee population. I understand your concerns, Captain, Elena replied. But, Admiral Mitchell has already confirmed that special operations support will be provided. A SEAL team is being diverted from another operation and will link up with us within 18 hours. Your unit's role will be to provide perimeter security and extraction support. Private Williams looked nervously at his fellow soldiers. At 19 years old, he'd never been involved in anything approaching this level of complexity. Ma'am, how do we know this isn't some kind of setup? I mean, what if the terrorists know we're coming? Elena's expression became more serious. That's actually one of our biggest concerns, Private. The timing of this meeting, combined with the compromise of my cover, suggests that someone might be trying to flush out American intelligence operations in the region. But, the potential intelligence value is too high to ignore. Jake was beginning to understand the impossible situation they were all in. So we're essentially walking into what could be a trap, but the potential payoff is worth the risk. That's about the size of it, Captain, Elena confirmed. But, there's something else. The intelligence suggests that these 3 financiers are planning something much bigger than anything they've attempted before. We're talking about potential attacks on American soil, not just regional terrorist operations. The weight of that information settled over the group like a heavy blanket. Each soldier understood that their actions over the next 36 hours could potentially prevent attacks that might kill hundreds or thousands of innocent Americans. What exactly do we know about this compound? Chen asked, shifting into tactical planning mode. Elena moved to the window and pointed toward the mountains in the distance. It's built into the side of a hill, with the refugee camp spread out below it. The compound itself has 3 main buildings connected by covered walkways. Intelligence suggests the meeting will take place in the central building, which is also where the 3 targets are most likely to be sleeping tonight. Rodriguez studied the terrain visible from their position. What kind of security are we looking at? Based on my observations and intelligence from local contacts, approximately 15 to 20 armed guards, plus whatever personal security the visiting financiers brought with them. But, here's the complication, many of the guards are locals who've been hired for protection, not ideologically committed terrorists. Some of them might surrender rather than fight if presented with the right opportunity. Jake was impressed by the depth of Elena's intelligence gathering. She clearly had extensive knowledge of not just the physical layout but the personnel and their motivations. How long have you been planning for an operation like this? I've been developing contingency plans for various scenarios since I arrived in the region, Elena admitted. The possibility of a high-value target gathering was always one of the scenarios we prepared for. But, I never expected it to happen so soon after my cover was compromised. The radio interrupted their planning session. Alpha Leader, this is Control. We're receiving reports of increased terrorist activity in your area. Are you prepared to hold your current position? Jake looked questioningly at Elena before responding. Control, this is Alpha Leader. We're going to need to relocate to a more secure position. Our current location may be compromised. Elena was already moving, gathering the few personal items that were crucial to maintaining her cover story. There's a safe house about 2 kilometers from here where we can regroup and wait for the SEAL team to arrive. It's operated by one of my local contacts who's been providing intelligence for the past 3 months. Is this contact trustworthy? Chen asked. The idea of relying on local intelligence sources made her nervous, especially given the high stakes of their current situation. As trustworthy as anyone can be in this business, Elena replied honestly. He's a former Afghan army officer who lost his family in a terrorist attack 2 years ago. His hatred of the terrorist networks is personal, which makes him reliable. But, you're right to be cautious. In this environment, loyalties can change quickly. As they prepared to move, Elena took one last look around the room where she'd been living for the past several weeks. It represented months of careful work, building relationships and gathering intelligence that had now led to this crucial moment. Everything she'd sacrificed over the past 6 months was coming down to the next day and a half. All right, everyone, Jake announced. We're moving in 5 minutes. Standard tactical formation, but remember we're now protecting a high-value intelligence asset. Rodriguez, you're on point. Chen, rear guard. Williams and Patterson, stay close to Lieutenant Commander Vasquez. Elena pulled a traditional Afghan headscarf over her hair and wrapped it around her face in the manner of local women. To any casual observer, she once again appeared to be just another displaced civilian. But, Jake noticed how she kept her hands free and positioned herself to have clear sight lines while they moved. The journey to the safe house took them through narrow village streets and across open fields where they were exposed to observation from multiple directions. Elena moved with the practiced ease of someone who had made this journey many times before, leading them along routes that provided maximum cover while avoiding areas where they might encounter hostile forces. The safe house is operated by a man named Ahmad, Elena explained quietly as they walked. To anyone watching, I'm his niece seeking shelter after my husband's death. You're American soldiers who rescued me from terrorists and are bringing me to safety. It's a simple story that explains our presence together without raising too many questions. 20 minutes later, they approached a modest compound surrounded by a low stone wall. Elena whistled softly in a pattern that was clearly a prearranged signal. After a few moments, a bearded man in his 40s appeared at the gate and beckoned them inside quickly. Ahmad, these are the American soldiers I told you about, Elena said in Pashto before switching back to English. Captain Morrison, this is Ahmad Rashidi, one of our most valuable intelligence assets in the region. Ahmad shook hands with Jake formally. Captain, it is honor to help American soldiers. Elena has told me much about importance of stopping these terrorist dogs who kill innocent people. Jake was struck by the man's dignified bearing and obvious intelligence. Despite the simple surroundings, Ahmad carried himself with the confidence of someone who had once held significant responsibility. We're grateful for your assistance, Mr. Rashidi, Jake replied respectfully. Elena tells us you've been providing crucial intelligence about terrorist activities in this area. My family was killed by suicide bomber 2 years ago, Ahmad said quietly. My wife, 2 daughters, and my father. They were at market buying vegetables when terrorist exploded himself. Since that day, I worked to destroy these animals who claim to serve Allah but serve only death. The personal motivation behind Ahmed's cooperation was clear, and Jake understood why Elena trusted him. A man seeking vengeance for his murdered family was unlikely to betray those who were fighting the same enemy. Elena and Ahmad spoke quickly in Pashto for several minutes while the soldiers established defensive positions around the compound. Jake caught enough words to understand they were discussing the planned operation and the arrival of additional American forces. Ahmad has confirmed the intelligence about tomorrow night's meeting, Elena reported. He says there's been unusual activity at the compound for the past 2 days, with expensive vehicles arriving and additional security personnel taking positions around the refugee camp. Has he seen the targets themselves? Rodriguez asked. 2 of the 3 have definitely arrived, Elena confirmed after consulting with Ahmad. The 3rd is expected sometime this evening. According to Ahmad's sources inside the camp, the meeting is definitely scheduled for tomorrow night. Jake checked his watch. They had less than 18 hours before the SEAL team arrived, and less than 30 hours before the terrorist meeting took place. The timeline was tight, but it was workable if everything went according to plan. What do we know about the layout of the compound? Chen asked, already thinking about tactical approaches. Elena spread a hand-drawn map on the table. Ahmad helped me create this based on his observations over the past several months. The main building where the meeting will take place has 2 entrances, but only one is typically guarded during nighttime hours. There's a service tunnel that runs from the refugee camp up to the compound's kitchen area, originally built for food deliveries. That could be our way in, Jake mused, studying the map carefully. What about extraction routes? There are 3 possible escape routes, Elena pointed to different areas on the map. But, all of them require crossing open ground that would leave us exposed if the operation goes wrong. That's why the SEAL team will be crucial. We need enough firepower to fight our way out if necessary, but also the precision to avoid civilian casualties. Ahmad brought them tea and simple food while they continued planning. Jake was impressed by the man's hospitality despite the obvious danger their presence brought to his home. It was clear that Ahmad understood the risks but was committed to helping them succeed. Captain, Elena said quietly, pulling Jake aside. There's something else you need to know. Admiral Mitchell's intelligence suggests that one of the terrorist financiers is actually an American citizen. If we capture him alive, it could provide invaluable information about how terrorist networks operate within the United States. Jake felt the stakes of their mission rise even higher. Are we talking about someone who could lead us to sleeper cells or plan domestic attacks? Potentially, yes, Elena confirmed. But, it also means we have to be extremely careful about how we handle the capture. This person will have constitutional rights as an American citizen, even though he's working with terrorist organizations. The legal and political complexities of their mission were becoming clearer. This wasn't just about capturing foreign terrorists, it was about dealing with American traitors in a way that would hold up in federal court while preventing future attacks on American soil. As evening approached, Jake gathered his soldiers for a final briefing before the SEAL team's arrival. Each man understood that they were about to participate in one of the most important operations of their military careers. The intelligence they hoped to gather could save hundreds or thousands of lives, but the risks were enormous. Tomorrow night, we're going to be part of something bigger than anything we've done before, Jake told his men. I won't lie to you, the dangers are real, and the margin for error is practically zero. But, if we succeed, we'll have struck a major blow against terrorist networks that threaten innocent people around the world. Elena watched the soldiers prepare themselves mentally for what lay ahead. She recognized the mixture of fear, excitement, and determination in their faces. It was the same expression she'd seen in mirrors before her own most dangerous operations. These were good soldiers who would do their duty, regardless of the personal cost. One more thing, Elena added to Jake's briefing. Tomorrow night, you're not just protecting American lives, you're protecting the innocent civilians in that refugee camp who have already suffered more than any human being should have to endure. Our success means they stay safe, and the people responsible for their suffering finally face justice. The SEAL team arrived at Ahmed's compound just after midnight, moving through the darkness like shadows. Jake had worked with Special Operations Forces before, but he was still impressed by their silent efficiency. The team leader, Commander Rick Santos, was a veteran of dozens of high-risk operations, and his calm confidence immediately raised the morale of Jake's soldiers. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, Santos said formally as he shook Elena's hand, Admiral Mitchell sends her regards and wants you to know that Washington is watching this operation very closely. The intelligence you've gathered over the past 6 months has already prevented 2 planned attacks on American targets in Europe. Elena felt a surge of validation. The months of isolation and danger had been worth it, even if this mission ended her deep cover operation permanently. Commander Santos, I'm glad to have professional support. Captain Morrison's unit has been exceptional, but we're going to need SEAL-level precision for what we're attempting tonight. Santos spread a detailed satellite photograph on the table next to Elena's hand-drawn map. Our intelligence confirms 3 high-value targets are confirmed in the compound. The meeting is scheduled to begin at 2100 hours local time, which gives us exactly 19 hours to finalize our approach. Jake studied the satellite image, comparing it to Elena's map. The level of detail she had achieved through months of careful observation was remarkable, matching almost perfectly with the high-tech intelligence-gathering capabilities of the military. What's the plan for approach and extraction? Chen asked, leaning over the photographs. Santos pointed to several locations on the satellite image. We'll establish overwatch positions on these 3 hills surrounding the compound. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez will enter through the service tunnel she's identified, while my team provides cover and support. Captain Morrison's unit will secure our extraction route and be ready to provide heavy fire support if needed. Elena shook her head. Commander, with respect, I think we need to reconsider the approach. If I go in alone and something goes wrong, we lose everything. I suggest a 2-person infiltration team, myself and one of your operators who can provide backup and help with the capture of the targets. Santos considered this for a moment. It increases the risk of detection, but you're right about the backup. If you're compromised, a single operator won't be enough to complete the mission. Who do you recommend? Petty Officer Martinez, Santos replied without hesitation. She's got the most experience with close-quarters operations and speaks fluent Arabic. If your cover story needs to be adjusted to include another person, she can pose as your cousin. Jake was surprised to learn that the SEAL team included a female operator, but he realized it made perfect sense for this type of mission. 2 women moving through a refugee camp would attract far less attention than any combination involving male operators. Elena nodded approvingly. That works well with the cover story. Martinez and I will enter the compound during the afternoon prayer time when most of the guards will be distracted. We'll hide inside the main building until the meeting begins, then attempt to capture the 3 targets when they're all together in one room. What about communications? Rodriguez asked. How do we coordinate if something goes wrong? Santos produced a small device that looked like a traditional Afghan jewelry piece. This is a microtransmitter disguised as a local artifact. Elena will wear it, and will maintain constant monitoring. If the operation is compromised, we'll know immediately and can adjust our response. Ahmad had been listening quietly to the planning discussion, occasionally offering details about guard rotations and local customs that might affect the operation. There is one more thing, he said hesitantly. My sources tell me that one of the terrorist leaders has brought his young son to the meeting. A boy perhaps 10 years old. The implications of this information hit everyone immediately. The presence of a child would complicate any capture operation enormously, both tactically and morally. None of the operators wanted to see an innocent child caught in the crossfire, regardless of his father's activities. Does the child stay with his father, or is he housed separately? Elena asked. My contact says the boy stays close to his father at all times, Ahmad replied. The man is apparently very protective and doesn't trust anyone else to watch his son. Santos frowned as he considered how this would affect their operational planning. We'll have to be prepared for a hostage situation involving a minor. That changes everything about how we can approach the capture. Elena was already thinking through modified scenarios. If the child is present during the meeting, we may have to wait for an opportunity when he's separated from the adults. That could mean a much longer operation with higher risk of detection. Jake realized that the ethical complexities of their mission had just increased dramatically. Are we prepared to abort if we can't guarantee the child's safety? Those aren't our orders, Santos replied grimly. Admiral Mitchell was clear that stopping these three targets takes priority over almost any other consideration. But, I'm not willing to put a child at risk unless there's absolutely no alternative. Elena appreciated Santos's moral stance, but she also understood the broader implications of failing to capture the terrorist financiers. The intelligence suggests these men are planning attacks that could kill thousands of people. We have to weigh the risk to one child against the potential to save many innocent lives. The difficult ethical calculation was one that every soldier faced in war zones, but it never became easier with experience. Each person in the room understood that they might have to make impossible choices in the next 24 hours. Let's continue planning as if the child won't be present during the meeting, Santos decided. We'll develop contingency plans for his presence, but we'll hope for the best-case scenario. Elena and Petty Officer Martinez spent the rest of the morning working on their cover story and coordinating their approach. Martinez was an experienced operator who had conducted similar missions in Iraq and Syria, but she admitted that Elena's deep knowledge of local customs and language would be crucial for success. I've studied Afghan culture and language, but you've been living it for 6 months, Martinez said as they practiced moving and communicating like local women. If we're questioned by guards, you'll have to take the lead in any conversations. Elena nodded. The key is confidence without arrogance. We're 2 women seeking to visit relatives in the refugee camp. We're respectful but not overly submissive. Too much deference would actually make us more suspicious. As afternoon approached, Jake gathered his soldiers for final equipment checks and tactical briefings. Each man understood his role in the operation, but the complexity of the mission meant that adaptability would be crucial. Remember, Jake told his men, our primary job is extraction support. But, if things go wrong, we may need to provide cover fire in a civilian environment. Every shot has to count, and we cannot accept collateral damage. Private Williams, who had been nervous about the mission since its scope became clear, raised his hand. Captain, what if the terrorists try to use the refugees as human shields? How do we respond to that? It was a question that Jake had been dreading, because there was no good answer. We follow rules of engagement and try to minimize harm to innocents. But, Williams, you need to understand that sometimes in war, there are no perfect choices. We do our best with the situation we're given. Elena and Martinez began their approach to the compound at 1,400 hours, during the afternoon prayer time when most of the guards would be distracted. They moved slowly through the refugee camp, stopping occasionally to speak with other women and children to maintain the appearance of casual visitors. The refugee camp was a sobering sight, hundreds of families living in temporary shelters, having fled their homes due to violence and instability. Elena was reminded of why her mission was so important. These people deserved to live without fear of terrorist attacks, and the intelligence she'd gathered could help protect them and countless others. Elena, Martinez whispered as they approached the compound's perimeter, I count 6 guards visible from this position. That's more than our intelligence suggested. Elena studied the guard positions carefully. They've increased security for the meeting, which confirms that all 3 targets are probably already inside. We need to adjust our entry point. They circled around to the service tunnel Elena had identified earlier. It was partially hidden by refugee shelters, which provided cover for their approach. Elena had used this tunnel twice before during her intelligence gathering, so she knew it was safe but challenging to navigate. The tunnel is about 30 meters long and ends in the compound's kitchen area, Elena explained as they prepared to enter. There's usually 1 guard in the kitchen, but he tends to be more focused on food preparation than security. Santos and his SEAL team were in position on the surrounding hills, with clear sight lines to the compound and ready to provide support if needed. Jake's soldiers had secured the extraction route and were prepared to move at a moment's notice. Sandstorm 3, this is Lighthouse, Santos's voice came through Elena's hidden communicator. You are clear to proceed. All Overwatch positions report normal activity at the compound. Elena and Martinez entered the tunnel just as the afternoon call to prayer began echoing across the valley. The timing was perfect, any sounds they made would be masked by the prayers, and most of the guards would be distracted. The tunnel was darker and more cramped than Elena remembered, but they moved through it quickly and silently. At the far end, Elena could hear voices and cooking sounds from the kitchen above them. She held up her hand to signal Martinez to wait while she listened carefully. "I can hear two voices, both speaking Arabic," Elena whispered. "One guard and one kitchen worker. We'll wait for the kitchen worker to leave before we move." After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, they heard footsteps moving away from the kitchen area. Elena slowly opened the tunnel entrance and peered into the kitchen. One guard sat with his back to them, eating from a bowl and paying no attention to his surroundings. Elena and Martinez moved into the kitchen with practiced stealth. The guard never knew what hit him. Martinez applied a sleeper hold that rendered him unconscious within seconds. They quickly moved his body to a corner where it wouldn't be easily discovered. "We're inside," Elena whispered into her communicator. "Moving to the meeting room area now." The interior of the compound was more luxurious than Elena had expected, with expensive carpets, modern furniture, and sophisticated communication equipment. It was clear that these terrorist financiers operated with significant resources and international connections. Elena led Martinez through corridors that she had studied in satellite photographs and intelligence reports but had never actually seen. The layout was exactly as predicted, which gave her confidence that the rest of their intelligence was accurate. "Elena, I can hear voices from the main meeting room," Martinez whispered. "Sounds like at least 4 people, speaking a mixture of Arabic and what might be English." Elena's pulse quickened. If the meeting had already begun, it meant all 3 targets were likely in the same location. But it also meant they would have to act quickly before the opportunity passed. They positioned themselves in a small storage room adjacent to the meeting area, with a clear view through a partially open door. Elena could see 3 men seated around a large table covered with maps, documents, and laptop computers. 2 additional men stood guard near the room's main entrance. "I can identify all 3 targets," Elena whispered into her communicator. "Confirm that the American citizen is present. No sign of the child yet." Santos's voice came through her earpiece. "Roger that, Sandstorm 3. You are authorized to proceed when you have a clear opportunity." Elena studied the layout of the room and the positions of the guards. A direct assault would be extremely risky, but she noticed that there was a second entrance to the room through a serving area that appeared to be unguarded. "Martinez, we're going to enter through the serving door during their next conversation break. I'll take the 2 guards while you secure the targets. Remember, we need at least one of them alive for interrogation." Martinez nodded and checked her non-lethal weapons. The plan was to use tranquilizer darts and restraint devices rather than firearms, to minimize noise and avoid killing high-value intelligence assets. Elena waited until the conversation in the meeting room became more animated, indicating that the participants were focused on their discussion rather than security concerns. She signaled Martinez, and they moved quickly through the serving entrance. Elena's training took over as she engaged the 2 guards simultaneously, using hand-to-hand combat techniques that rendered both unconscious before they could raise an alarm. Martinez moved immediately to the 3 targets, 2 of whom surrendered without resistance when they saw her weapon. The 3rd target, the American citizen according to their intelligence, tried to reach for a weapon but was quickly restrained. Within 60 seconds, all 3 high-value targets were secured and unconscious from tranquilizer darts. "Lighthouse, this is Sandstorm 3, Elena reported. All 3 packages are secured. Beginning extraction now." But, as they prepared to move the unconscious targets, Elena heard a sound that made her blood run cold, a child's voice calling for his father from somewhere else in the compound. "Martinez," Elena whispered urgently, "the boy is here after all. We need to locate him and make sure he's safe before we extract." The sound of small footsteps running through the corridors meant that their carefully planned extraction was about to become much more complicated. Elena realized that their mission was far from over. In fact, the most dangerous part was just beginning. Elena and Martinez quickly moved the unconscious targets to a secure room while Elena went to find the child. She found a frightened 10-year-old boy searching for his father, calling out in Arabic and, clearly distressed by the sudden silence from the meeting room. Elena knelt down and spoke to the boy gently in Arabic, explaining that she was there to help and that his father was safe. The child was scared but responsive, and Elena realized that he could actually help them maintain their cover story during extraction. "Lighthouse, this is Sandstorm 3, Elena reported. "We have the civilian child secured and safe. Modifying extraction to include protective custody. All packages ready for transport." Santos coordinated the extraction with military precision, and, within 20 minutes, Elena, Martinez, and Jake's unit were moving away from the compound with their 3 high-value prisoners and the protected child. The operation had succeeded beyond their highest expectations. As they reached the extraction point where helicopters waited to transport them to a secure facility, Elena reflected on the 6 months of preparation that had made this moment possible. The intelligence they had gathered would prevent countless terrorist attacks and save thousands of innocent lives. Jake approached Elena as they prepared to board the helicopters. "Lieutenant Commander, I just wanted to say that serving with you has been an honor. What you accomplished here will go down as one of the most successful intelligence operations in military history." Elena smiled tiredly. "Captain, it was only possible because of the support from soldiers like you and your team. This was never a solo mission, it was always about Americans working together to protect innocent people." As the helicopters lifted off into the Afghan sunset, Elena knew that her days of deep cover operations were over. But the intelligence network she had built and the terrorist financing operation she had dismantled would continue protecting American lives for years to come. The woman they had thought was trapped had actually been the key to one of the most successful counterterrorism operations ever conducted. Elena Vasquez had proven that sometimes the most dangerous missions require not just physical courage, but the mental strength to live a lie for months in service of a greater truth.